Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a wound in the galaxy. It has been there for more than 10,000 years, and it is not healing. If anything, it is growing, spreading its infection across the stars like a slow and terrible sickness that refuses to be contained. The astronomers of the Imperium call it the ocularis terribus. The scholars of forbidden texts call it the gateway to damnation. The navigators who steer humanity's ships through the treacherous currents of the warp call it the one place they will never, under any circumstances, willingly approach. But most people across the billion worlds of the Imperium of man know it by a simpler name, one that carries within it all the dread and revulsion that such a place deserves. They call it the Eye of Terror. And here is the thing that most people do not understand about the Eye of Terror. Terror is not merely a stronghold, for the terror is not merely a stronghold for the enemies of mankind. It is not simply a fortress for the chaos gods and their servants to hide within between assaults on the material universe. The Eye of Terror is something far stranger, far older, and far more dangerous than that. Because within its boundaries, yes, in the depths of that swirling maelstrom, where the warp and reality have become one and the same, there are things that exist which frighten even the dark gods themselves. There are phenomena so ancient and so powerful that the mightiest demons will not approach them. There are regions of space so saturated with conflicting energies that even the servants of the ruinous powers flee from their boundaries. And at the very center of the eye, where reality has been torn so completely that nothing resembling normal existence can survive, there is something so incomprehensible that even the chaos gods, those ancient and terrible entities who have shaped the fate of the galaxy since before humanity learned to walk upright, refuse to look upon it directly. So settle in, get comfortable, and let us journey together into the most dangerous place in the entire galaxy. Let us peer into the Eye of Terror and discover what horrors lurk within its depths, what ancient secrets lie buried beneath the ruins of a fallen civilization, what impossible forces wage eternal war against the very gods of chaos within their own domain, and what precisely it is about this place that makes even the lords of the warp afraid. Now, before we can understand what lives within the Eye of Terror and why it frightens the chaos gods, we first need to understand what the Eye actually is, because the Eye of Terror is not like other places in the galaxy. It does not follow the rules that govern the rest of existence. It is not a star system, or a nebula, or a region of empty space. It is something else entirely, something that defies easy categorization, something that challenges the very foundations of what we understand reality to be. The Eye of Terror stretches across roughly 20,000 light-years of the galaxy, is situated in the segmentum obscurus to the galactic north and west of Terra itself. To put that in perspective, the entire galaxy is approximately 100,000 light-years across, which means that the Eye of Terror occupies a staggering portion of the galactic disk. It is not a small blemish on the face of the Milky Way. It is a gaping wound, a catastrophic injury that has fundamentally altered the nature of the galaxy itself. Within the boundaries of the Eye, the normal rules of physics simply do not apply. Time becomes meaningless. A warrior who enters the Eye might spend what feels like a single day within its borders, only to emerge and discover that centuries have passed in the outside universe. Or the reverse might be true, and what seems like an eternity of suffering within the Eye might correspond to mere moments in the real world. Matter, thought, and energy blend together into something indistinguishable. It is something that shifts and changes with the whims of whatever entity happens to hold dominance over a particular region at any given moment. Space itself is unreliable. Planets shift their positions without warning. Stars burn in colors that have no name in any human language. Entire solar systems appear and disappear like bubbles rising and bursting on the surface of a boiling sea. This is because the Eye of Terror exists in both the material universe and the immaterium simultaneously. The barrier between real space and the warp, That thin veil that normally separates the physical world from the nightmare realm of psychic energy that underlies all of reality has been completely destroyed within the eye's boundaries. A ship can enter the warp without a warp drive simply by crossing the border of the eye. The warp and real space are not merely close together here. They are the same thing. They have been merged, fused, blended into a single hellish reality where the laws of nature compete with the laws of madness for dominance, and madness usually wins. The worlds within the eye are known as demon worlds, and each one of them constitutes its own bizarre sub-reality. The physical laws that govern each world are shaped by whichever aspect of whichever chaos god is venerated by its inhabitants at any given time. A world dedicated to Khorne, the blood god. It might be a realm of eternal warfare where rivers of blood flow between mountains of skulls, and the very ground trembles with the constant thunder of combat. A world claimed by Nurgle, the Lord of Decay, might be a rotting paradise where every living thing exists in a state of perpetual decomposition and rebirth, where the air itself is thick with disease and the ground squirms with maggots the size of cattle. A world that has fallen under the influence of Tzeentch, the changer of ways. It might be a constantly shifting landscape of crystalline structures and impossible geometries, where nothing remains the same from one moment to the next, and even the concept of stable reality is an illusion. And a world belonging to Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, might be a place of such overwhelming sensory experience that merely existing upon its surface would drive any mortal mind to madness within moments. These are the places that the traitor legions call home. Well, these are the worlds where the servants of the dark gods have spent 10,000 years building their power, marshalling their forces, and preparing for the day when they will finally break free from the eye and claim the galaxy for their masters. And yet, even among these hardened veterans of millennia of warfare in the most hostile environment imaginable, there are places within the eye that they will not go. There are regions that even the most powerful demon prince refuses to approach. Yet there are things lurking in the deepest reaches of the eye that make even the gods themselves feel something that, if they were capable of such an emotion, might be called fear. But to understand why, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to understand how the Eye of Terror came to be, because its origin story is directly connected to the nature of the things that dwell within it. And that story begins not with humanity, not with the Chaos Gods, and not even with the Warp itself. It begins with the Aeldari, the ancient race that once ruled the galaxy, and the catastrophic mistake that destroyed their civilization and gave birth to the most terrible wound the galaxy has ever known. The Aeldari, known to the Imperium as the Eldar, were once the dominant species in the galaxy. Their empire stretched across millions of worlds, and their civilization had reached heights of achievement that humanity, even at its peak during the Dark Age of technology, could barely comprehend. As they were a psychic race, deeply connected to the Warp in ways that even the most gifted human psychers could never match. And this connection had allowed them to build a civilization of almost unimaginable beauty and sophistication. Their technology was so advanced that it bordered on the miraculous. Their art and culture were refined to a degree that defied mortal understanding. Their cities were monuments to aesthetic perfection, as their worlds were shaped into paradises that could make the most jaded aesthete weep with joy at their beauty. But the Aeldari's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Their deep psychic connection to the Warp meant that their emotions, their thoughts, and their desires resonated within the Imperium with a power and intensity that no other race could match. Every joy they felt, every sorrow they experienced, and every moment of pleasure or pain echoed through the Warp like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples out across the psychic ocean that underlies all of reality. And as their civilization grew more sophisticated, more refined, more dedicated to the pursuit of every possible sensation and experience, those ripples grew stronger and more frequent. The Aeldari had achieved everything. They had conquered every challenge, mastered every art, and explored every frontier of knowledge and experience. and in the absence of any external challenge, they turned inward, seeking ever more extreme forms of stimulation to fill the void left by the absence of struggle. What followed was a descent into depravity that defies description. The Eldari became consumed by their own desires, addicted to sensation in all its forms, pursuing pleasure and pain with equal fervor, because both generated the intense emotional experiences that had become the only thing that could make them feel alive. Their society fragmented into pleasure cults and sensation-seeking cliques, each one dedicated to pushing the boundaries of experience further and further beyond anything that could be called sane or healthy. Murder became an art form. Suffering became a source of entertainment. The most depraved and horrifying acts imaginable were committed not out of malice or necessity, but simply because they generated interesting sensations. And in the warp, something was stirring. All of that psychic energy, all of those intense emotions, all of that concentrated depravity and excess was pooling together, coalescing, taking form. Like a whirlpool in an ocean of psychic energy, the collective unconscious of an entire civilization was being drawn together into a single point, at a single entity, a single god. The Eldari were creating something in the warp, something that was being born from the darkest and most extreme aspects of their collective psyche. And when it finally woke up, when that newborn god opened its eyes for the first time and screamed its birth cry into the Imperium, the result was the greatest catastrophe the galaxy had ever witnessed. The birth of Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, the youngest of the four great Chaos gods. It was an event of such staggering psychic magnitude that it tore reality itself apart. The psychic shockwave that accompanied Slaanesh's awakening was so powerful that it could not be contained within the warp. It burst through the barrier between the immaterium and real space with the force of a psychic supernova, annihilating everything in its path. The core worlds of the Eldari Empire, those beautiful paradises where the worst excesses of their civilization had been concentrated, but were destroyed in an instant. Billions of Eldari were killed, their souls devoured by the newborn god, even as it drew its first breath. The entire center of their civilization was simply erased, replaced by a gaping wound in the fabric of reality that would never heal. That wound was the Eye of Terror. Think about what that means for a moment. The Eye of Terror is not merely a warp storm or a region of spatial instability. It is the birthplace of a god. It is the point in space and time where a being of almost incomprehensible power burst into existence, and the scar left behind by that event is permanent. The energy of Slaanesh's birth was so intense that it permanently fused the warp and real space together across a region spanning 20,000 light-years. Every world that existed within that region, every planet and star and asteroid, was simultaneously dragged into the warp and left in real space at the same time. Yes, creating the impossible, nightmarish hybrid reality that the Eye represents. But here is the part that most people miss when they talk about the creation of the Eye of Terror. The Eye was not truly a new phenomenon. According to more recent lore, the weakness in reality that allowed Slaanesh's birth to tear open such a massive rift had existed for far longer than the Eldari civilization. The original breach in reality at that location was created by the Old Ones during the War in Heaven, but that ancient and apocalyptic conflict between the first sentient species in the galaxy and the Necrons millions upon millions of years before the Eldari even existed. The Necrons, those soulless mechanical warriors who had traded their flesh for living metal in exchange for power from the terrible star gods known as the Satan, had fought a war against the Old Ones that spanned millions of years. During that war, the Old Ones had created the breach that would eventually become the Eye, and the Necrons had sealed it closed using their own technology. Devices made from a substance that would come to be known as Blackstone or Noctilith were placed across the region to suppress the activity of the warp and keep that ancient wound sealed shut. For 60 million years, those devices held. The Necrons went into their great sleep, and the galaxy moved on. The Aeldari rose to power, built their empire on the very worlds where the Necron pylons silently did their work, never knowing that the ground beneath their feet was sitting on top of the most dangerous fault line in the galaxy. And when Slaanesh was born, when that psychic shockwave tore through the region, the ancient seals were blown apart. The Eye of Terror reopened with a vengeance, swallowing the heart of the Aeldari Empire and creating the wound in reality that has defined the galaxy ever since. This means that the Eye of Terror is not 10,000 years old. It is tens of millions of years old. But the weakness in reality that it represents predates every current civilization in the galaxy, and the things that exist within it, the phenomena that frighten even the Chaos Gods, may be connected to forces and events that stretch back to the very dawn of life in the Milky Way. Now let us talk about the interior of the Eye of Terror itself, because it is here that things begin to get truly strange. And I mean strange even by the already impossibly bizarre standards of a region where the warp and real space have been permanently fused together. If you think demon worlds and time-warping phenomena are unsettling, what awaits us in the deeper reaches of the Eye is something else entirely. The first thing to understand about the interior of the Eye of Terror is that it is essentially unmappable. It is virtually impossible to create any kind of reliable chart of the Eye because objects, planets and stars, change their positions, disappear, or transform into something else without warning. Think about that for a moment. Entire planets, some of them the size of gas giants or larger, simply vanishing from one moment to the next, only to reappear somewhere else entirely, or to be replaced by something that was not there before. Very few locations within the Eye have a fixed position, and most of those that do belong to the most powerful demons and demon princes, and who have expended enormous amounts of psychic energy to anchor their domains in place against the constant flux of the surrounding reality. The deeper you travel into the Eye, the more unstable reality becomes. The outer reaches, while still nightmarish by any reasonable standard, at least maintain some semblance of consistency. The demon worlds near the edges of the Eye tend to remain in roughly the same locations and the physical laws that govern them, while warped and twisted by the influence of the Chaos Gods, at least follow some kind of internal logic. A world dedicated to Khorne will always be a world of violence and bloodshed. A world dedicated to Nurgle will always be a world of decay and rebirth. There is a perverse consistency to these places, a dark logic that can be understood and even predicted by those with sufficient knowledge and experience. But as you move further inward toward the center of the Eye, even that twisted consistency begins to break down. The influence of individual Chaos Gods becomes less dominant, replaced by something older and more fundamental. The raw, undifferentiated energy of chaos itself begins to assert its dominance, and the neat divisions between the domains of the four gods start to blur and merge. Worlds shift their allegiance from one god to another without warning. Landscapes change their fundamental nature between one heartbeat and the next. As a warrior might be walking through a desert of ash and bone one moment, and find themselves drowning in a sea of living flesh the next, without any transition, without any warning, without any explanation. If you think about the warp, that is fine. That is to be expected in a realm where thought and reality are one and the same. But the Eye of Terror takes this to an extreme that even the warp cannot match. Because within the Eye, as the thoughts and emotions that shape reality are not merely those of individual beings or even individual gods, they are the accumulated psychic residue of tens of millions of years of conflict, suffering, creation, and destruction. The Eye is saturated with the echoes of the war in heaven, the memories of the Eldari Empire at its peak, the death screams of billions of Eldari at the moment of the fall, the constant prayers and blasphemies of 10,000 years of chaos worship, and the ceaseless background noise of the warp itself, all layered on top of each other in an impenetrable palimpsest of psychic energy that makes even the most powerful sorcerer's head spin. The warp itself is dangerous to unfettered imagination. Within the Eye, if you think it, the warp can make it reality, though always at a price. This is not a gentle or cooperative process. The warp does not politely ask what you would like to manifest and then helpfully bring it into being. And it reaches into your mind, finds your deepest fears and your most desperate desires, and makes them real whether you want it to or not. After the Horus heresy, when hordes of traitors sought refuge in the Eye, those weakest of mind and least disciplined were very quickly culled, killed off by their own thoughts and fantasies run rampant. The monumental architectures that exist within the Eye, the landscapes of skulls and fortresses fashioned from bones, are not built or arranged by anyone. They are the warp reacting to thought, manifesting terror and madness into physical form. The very buildings are dreams given substance, nightmares crystallized into matter. Mortals within the Eye, humans and otherwise, are nothing more than playthings of the demons and the chaos gods. For the glory of chaos, they undertake gargantuan but nevertheless pointless projects. They get divided into armies and sent to fight each other in wars that serve no strategic purpose. They form giant religious ceremonies that worship nothing and accomplish nothing. They build monuments to obscure causes or waste away, performing utterly meaningless labor, such as cataloging and categorizing individual grains of sand on a beach that stretches for thousands of miles. And this insanity can change into a different kind of insanity at any moment, without warning, without transition, without mercy. This is the environment in which the traitor legions have existed for 10,000 years. This is the crucible that has shaped the warriors of the Black Crusades, the soldiers who follow Abaddon the Despoiler on his endless war against the Imperium. They are not merely hardened by battle, they are hardened by the experience of living in a place where reality itself is hostile, where the ground beneath your feet might decide to become liquid at any moment. Yes, where the air you breathe might suddenly become fire or acid or something for which no word exists in any language, and where your own thoughts are weapons that can be turned against you by the very environment you inhabit. And yet, even these impossibly resilient survivors, these warriors who have endured the worst that the Eye of Terror has to offer for 10 millennia, have their limits. Because there are places within the Eye that even they refuse to go. There are regions so dangerous, are so fundamentally wrong, that even Chaos Space Marines who have stared down greater demons and survived centuries of warp exposure will turn their ships around and flee rather than approach them. And the most terrifying of all these places lies at the very center of the Eye. At the heart of the Eye of Terror lies something called the Bissos. It is, in the most literal sense imaginable, a hole in the fabric of reality through which raw chaos energy pours out into the material universe. Yet if the Eye of Terror is a wound in the galaxy, then the Bissos is the point where the knife went deepest, the place where the damage is most severe and most irreparable. It is the absolute center of the maelstrom, the point where the fusion of the warp and real space is most complete, where the distinction between thought and matter, between energy and substance, between existence and non-existence has been completely obliterated. And here is the detail that should make your blood run cold. The closer you get to the Bissos, the weirder things get, even by the already incomprehensible standards of the Eye of Terror. Demons and traitor Marines will avoid getting close to it, because things that go near the Bissos do not tend to come back. Let that sink in for a moment. Demons, beings of pure warp energy, who are essentially immortal within the Imperium, are afraid of the Bissos. Traitor Marines who have survived 10,000 years of warfare in the most hostile environment in the galaxy will not approach it. Something about the center of the Eye is so fundamentally dangerous that even beings who are essentially immune to most forms of physical harm refuse to risk going near it. What could possibly frighten a demon? These are entities that exist as expressions of the chaos gods themselves, fragments of divine will given form and purpose. They cannot truly die in the conventional sense. Even if destroyed, they simply return to the warp and eventually reform. They are creatures of psychic energy, sustained by the emotions and beliefs of mortal beings, and within the Eye of Terror, where the warp and real space are one and the same. They should be at the absolute peak of their power. And yet something near the Bissos is powerful enough, dangerous enough, strange enough to make them turn and flee. The lore is deliberately vague about what exactly exists at the center of the eye, and that vagueness is itself a kind of answer. The Chaos Gods, for all their immense power, are fundamentally comprehensible beings. They are reflections of mortal emotions, amplified and distorted to cosmic proportions, but still recognizable. Khorne is rage, Nurgle is despair, Tzeentch is ambition, Slaanesh is excess. You can name them, you can understand them, you can even predict their behavior to some degree. But whatever exists at the heart of the eye, whatever it is that makes even the gods hesitate, does not seem to follow these rules. It is something beyond the four, something that does not fit neatly into the categories that the Chaos Gods represent, something that may be older than they are, something that may predate the very concept of chaos as the galaxy currently understands it. Some scholars of the Forbidden have speculated that the Bissos is not merely a wound in reality, but a kind of window, a lens through which something from beyond the warp, beyond even the realm of chaos itself, is looking into our universe. Others have suggested that it is a remnant of the war in heaven, a weapon or device created by the Old Ones or the Citan that has been slowly corrupted and transformed by millions of years of exposure to warp energy into something that neither its creators nor the Chaos Gods can control. Still others believe that it is simply the point where the fabric of reality has been so thoroughly destroyed that the normal rules governing the relationship between the warp and the material universe no longer apply, creating a zone of absolute metaphysical anarchy where even the laws of chaos itself break down. Whatever the truth may be, the Bissos represents a kind of ultimate boundary, a threshold beyond which even the power of the dark gods cannot reach. And the fact that such a place exists within their own domain, within the very heart of their greatest stronghold, is perhaps the most unsettling detail in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore, because it means that the Chaos Gods, for all their seemingly infinite power, are not omnipotent. There are forces in the galaxy, forces within the very warp that gives them life, that they cannot control, cannot comprehend, and cannot defeat. And those forces are right there, sitting at the center of the Eye of Terror, waiting. But the Bissos is not the only thing within the eye that makes the dark gods uncomfortable. There is another phenomenon, one that is perhaps even more terrifying from the perspective of the Chaos Gods and their servants, because unlike the distant and abstract threat of the Bissos, this phenomenon actively wages war against the forces of chaos within the eye itself. It does not merely exist as a passive mystery or an unknowable danger. It attacks, it destroys, it burns, and it does so with a fury and an intensity that cannot be matched by any force that the four gods can bring to bear against it. Thus it is called the Fire Tide. Deep within the Eye of Terror, in regions where you would expect to find nothing but the absolute dominion of chaos, there exist zones where the golden light of the Astronomicon, that immense psychic beacon projected from the heart of terror by the Emperor of Mankind himself, crashes against the walls of the warp storm with devastating force. The Astronomicon, as you may know, it is the psychic lighthouse that allows humanity's navigators to guide their ships through the treacherous currents of the warp. It is a signal of such staggering power that it can be perceived across the entire galaxy, a constant scream of psychic energy that echoes through the Imperium like a lighthouse beam cutting through the fog. What most people do not realize, what the Imperium itself may not fully comprehend, is that the Astronomicon does not merely illuminate the warp. It also wages war within it. And nowhere is this war more visible, more violent, or more devastating than within the Eye of Terror. The servants of chaos who dwell within the Eye can actually see the Astronomicon, not as a distant beacon or a faint glow on the horizon, but as a physical, tangible force that penetrates even into their purgatorial exile. And for them, it is not the comforting light of home that it represents to the navigators of the Imperium. It is pain. It is fire. and it plunges entire demon worlds into war. Where the light of the Astronomicon collides with the psychic energies of the Eye of Terror, the result is a zone of absolute devastation known as the Fire Tide. It is a region of space where two immense psychic forces, the power of the Emperor and the power of chaos, crash together in volatile torment. It would be a mistake to believe that this is a simple contest between good and evil, between order and chaos, between the light and the dark. And it is all psychic energy, smashing together with unimaginable violence, and everything caught in the crossfire is annihilated. Most of the worlds touched by the fire tide are uninhabitable, scoured clean of all life by the lethal collision of conflicting psychic energies. Entire planets are bathed in golden fire that burns with a heat that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the raw, focused will of the most powerful psychic being humanity has ever produced. Yet the fire does not merely burn, it erases, it unmakes, it reduces everything it touches to ash, not just physically, but metaphysically, destroying not just the body, but the soul, not just the material form, but the very essence of whatever being is unfortunate enough to be caught within its reach. And the fire tide is inhabited. Within the burning zone where the Astronomicon meets the Eye of Terror, an armies of entities that can only be described as fire angels wage eternal war against the forces of chaos. These are not demons in the traditional sense. They are not creatures born from the emotions and beliefs of mortal beings, shaped by the four chaos gods into instruments of their will. They are something else entirely. They are psychic projections, flame-wrought manifestations of the Emperor's will, all given form and purpose by the collision of the Astronomicon's light with the raw chaos energy of the Eye. They appear as choirs of flame-winged angels blazing with golden light, and they attack everything in their path with an indiscriminate fury that makes even the most bloodthirsty servants of Khorne look restrained by comparison. These entities wage war against the demons of the Eye with terrifying efficiency. They sweep through demon worlds like wildfire, burning away corruption and chaos influence with the same merciless thoroughness that a surgeon might use to excise a tumor. They do not negotiate. They do not show mercy. They do not differentiate between the servants of one chaos god and another. They simply burn, purify, and destroy, reducing everything they encounter to golden ash. And the chaos gods cannot stop them. This is the detail that truly makes the fire tide so frightening from the perspective of the ruinous powers. The Four, for all their immense power within the warp, cannot counteract the fire tide. They cannot douse its flames. They cannot turn its angels to their service. They cannot even block its advance across the worlds of the Eye. When the fire tide sweeps through a region, the gods and their servants can only retreat and wait for it to pass. It is a force within their own domain that they are powerless against, a constant reminder that they do not have absolute control over the Eye of Terror, thus that there is a power operating within their borders that they cannot defeat. The fire tide is described in the novel The Talon of Horus by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, one of the most acclaimed authors in the Black Library's stable. In that book, the Thousand-Sun sorcerer Iskander Khayon describes the experience of sailing through the fire tide in vivid and terrifying detail. His ship, the Tlaloc, emerges from the webway into a region of the Eye that is burning with golden light, and the effect is devastating. The hull temperature rises rapidly. The ship begins to shake and groan under the stress. Mutants and humans alike recoil from the acidic light that pours through the viewing ports. And as the ship struggles through the burning zone, they encounter one of the fire angels, a massive entity of pure psychic energy that attacks them with murderous intent, melting in psychic fire even as it assaults their vessel. Khayon describes the Astronomicon's presence within the Eye in terms that are worth contemplating. He says that from within the Eye, the Astronomicon is visible as a physical force, a wall of golden fire that burns across the void. And he notes that it is not a battle between order and chaos, not a simple struggle between good and evil. It is all psychic energy, crashing together in volatile torment, and everything caught between the two forces is destroyed. Beyond the fire tide, what's in the calmer regions where the Astronomican's influence is present but not overwhelming, there exist places known as the radiant worlds. These are planets that have been touched by the golden psychic storm, but not destroyed by it. They exist in a strange twilight state, neither fully corrupted by chaos nor fully purified by the Emperor's light, but trapped in a state of permanent psychic tension that makes them among the strangest places in the entire galaxy. The radiant worlds are uninhabitable by the servants of chaos, too saturated with the Emperor's psychic residue to be claimed by any of the four gods, but too deep within the eye to be reached or utilized by the Imperium. And within the radiant worlds, there are hints of something even stranger than the fire angels. There are references to an entity known as Imperius, described as the avatar of the Astronomican, a manifestation of the Emperor's will that exists independently within the Eye of Terror. This being is described as taking the form of a humble pilgrim wearing a mask of gold and light, and it appears to possess a degree of intelligence and autonomy that the fire angels lack. It is, in essence, a fragment of the Emperor himself, a piece of his consciousness that has been separated from the main body and given independent existence within the most hostile environment in the galaxy. The implications of this are staggering. If the Emperor, even in his diminished and dying state upon the Golden Throne, is capable of projecting autonomous manifestations of his will into the very heart of the Eye of Terror, then the Chaos Gods have every reason to be afraid, because it means that the enemy is not merely at their gates. The enemy is inside their fortress, burning down their worlds, destroying their servants, and there is nothing they can do about it. It is a fascinating paradox. Proximity of the eye to the Astronomican's proximity of the eye to the Astronomican's source means that the collision of these two immense psychic forces is at its most intense within the eye's boundaries. Chaos may control most of the eye, but the fire tide represents a permanent beachhead of the Emperor's power within Chaos's own domain. A zone of golden fire that cannot be extinguished and cannot be conquered. And for the Chaos Gods, who have spent 10,000 years building their power within the eye, preparing for the day when they will break free and claim the galaxy, the knowledge that the Emperor's influence reaches even into their most secure refuges must be deeply disturbing. It is one thing to face an enemy on the battlefield. It is another thing entirely to discover that your enemy has been living inside your home all along, burning down rooms that you thought were safely locked and barred against intrusion. The fire tide raises questions that even the most learned scholars of the Imperium cannot answer. If the Emperor is capable of projecting this level of force into the Eye of Terror from his position on the Golden Throne, why has he not done more? Why has the fire tide not expanded to consume the entire eye? Of maintaining the Astronomican and holding shut the webway breach beneath the Imperial Palace. Others suggest that the fire tide is not a deliberate weapon at all, but rather an unintended side effect of the Astronomican's operation, while a kind of psychic splash damage that occurs whenever the Emperor's beacon passes through a region saturated with warp energy. If this is the case, then the fire tide is even more terrifying than it initially appears, because it means that the Emperor is waging war against the Chaos Gods within the eye without even trying. The mere existence of the Astronomican, the simple fact of its continued operation, is enough to burn worlds and destroy demons within the heart of the Chaos God's own domain. While there is another detail about the fire tide that deserves special attention. The fire angels that inhabit the fire tide zone are described as being insane, not malevolent in the calculated, purposeful way that demons are, but truly, deeply, irreparably insane, driven mad by millennia of intolerable pain and suffering. This is a significant detail because it suggests that these entities, whatever their origin, are not simply mindless weapons. They are, or were, beings with some form of consciousness, some capacity for thought and feeling, and that consciousness has been shattered by the unimaginable stress of existing at the collision point between the Emperor's light and the darkness of chaos.
Now, before we keep going, I just want to take a quick second to say something. Out of everything I have covered on this channel, the Eye of Terror is honestly the topic I have wanted to get to the most. There's something about the idea that even the Chaos Gods have things they're afraid of that just hits different for me. It flips the whole setting on its head. We spend so much time talking about how terrifying chaos is, how unstoppable the Dark Gods are, and then you dig into the lore and realize they're looking over their shoulder too. This is what keeps me coming back to this universe. Every time you think you have reached the bottom, there's another layer underneath. But anyways, let's continue the video.
They are creatures of torment, forged in the fires of two incompatible psychic forces grinding against each other for 10,000 years. And their madness makes them all the more dangerous because it means they cannot be predicted, cannot be reasoned with, and cannot be controlled by anyone, including the Emperor himself. This is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Firetide from the perspective of the Chaos Gods. The Fire Angels are not servants of the Emperor in any meaningful sense. They are not following orders. They are not executing a strategy. They are simply burning, destroying, and annihilating everything they encounter because that is all they are capable of doing. They are psychic wildfires, as born from the friction between two cosmic forces, and they are as dangerous to anything loyal to the Emperor as they are to the servants of chaos. The fact that they primarily affect the Eye of Terror is merely a consequence of geography, not intention. If the Firetide were to expand, if the collision between the Astronomicon and the Warp were to intensify, these fire angels would burn Imperial worlds just as readily as demon worlds. And this introduces a deeply uncomfortable possibility. What happens when the Emperor finally dies? What happens when the Golden Throne fails and the Astronomicon goes silent? The conventional wisdom is that the death of the Emperor would be a catastrophe for the Imperium, removing the psychic beacon that allows warp travel and plunging humanity into an age of darkness from which it might never recover. But consider the alternative possibility. What if the death of the Emperor does not silence the Astronomicon, but instead transforms it into something else entirely? What if the psychic energy of the Emperor, freed from the constraints of the Golden Throne, were to explode into the warp with the same violence that accompanied the birth of Slaanesh? The result could be the creation of a new god, a fifth deity born from the collective faith and devotion of trillions of human beings. Or it could be the expansion of the Firetide to galaxy-spanning proportions, a wave of golden fire that would burn away chaos and Imperial alike in its path. The Chaos Gods have good reason to contemplate this possibility with dread. They know what happened when the Aeldari's collective psychic energy gave birth to Slaanesh. They know the destruction that accompanied that event. And they can see, within the Eye of Terror, yet the evidence of what the Emperor's psychic power is capable of, even in its current diminished state. If the Emperor were to die, if his power were to be unleashed without the constraints of the Golden Throne, the result could be a second fall, a second tearing of the veil, a second birth of a god. And this new god, born from the faith of humanity, rather than the depravity of the Aeldari, might not be friendly to the existing Chaos Gods at all. This is speculation, of course. The lore does not give us a definitive answer about what would happen if the Emperor died, but the existence of the Firetide within the Eye of Terror, the proof that the Emperor's power can manifest independently and wage war against chaos even from across the galaxy, suggests that the Chaos God's relationship with the Emperor is far more complicated and far more dangerous than a simple rivalry between opposing forces. The Emperor is not just an enemy of chaos, he is a potential successor, is a being whose ascension to full godhood could fundamentally reshape the warp in ways that the existing gods cannot predict or prevent. Let us also spend some time considering the daily reality of existence within the Eye of Terror, because understanding what life is like for the beings who actually live there helps illuminate why certain phenomena are so feared. We tend to think of the Eye as a place inhabited exclusively by traitor marines and demons, but the truth is far more complex. Yet the Eye is home to an enormous population of ordinary mortals, humans who were either trapped within the Eye when it formed, descended from those original inhabitants, or drawn into the Eye over the millennia as refugees, prisoners, or willing recruits to the cause of chaos. These mortals live lives of almost unimaginable hardship. They are constantly exposed to the corruptive influence of the warp, which warps their bodies so that their physical forms come to reflect their inner natures, and whether they want them to or not. A mortal who harbors secret anger might find his hands growing into claws. A mortal who indulges in gluttony might find his body swelling to grotesque proportions. A mortal who fears death might find his flesh becoming grey and lifeless, already half corpse even while still alive. These mutations are not chosen. They are imposed by the environment itself, a constant and inescapable reminder that within the eye, the warp has dominion over all flesh. As the mortal populations of the eye serve as labor, entertainment, and food for the demon princes and chaos lords who rule over them. They are divided into armies and sent to fight meaningless wars. They are organized into vast religious ceremonies that worship gods who view them with indifference at best and active malice at worst. They are forced to build monuments and structures of staggering scale that serve no purpose whatsoever. It's only to see those structures torn down and rebuilt in a different form when the whims of their overlords change. Their suffering is the fuel that powers the great game, the psychic energy generated by their misery and despair feeding the gods and their demonic servants in an endless cycle of exploitation. And yet, even among these wretched populations, there are those who have found ways to survive, even to thrive, in the eye's hostile environment. The neutral world of Sublime, for instance, as is one of the few precious neutral grounds within the eye, a non-aligned world where factions sometimes come to trade and negotiate. Trade is Sublime's lifeblood, and its archaeotech markets deal in everything from dreams and new sensations to powerful weaponry and raw materials. The world is surrounded by hundreds of heavily armed orbital battle stations to ensure that no outsider faction can interfere with its operations. Where other worlds belong to the traitor legions, demons, or the Dark Mechanicum, Sublime is a haven for renegades and pirates, a free port in a sea of madness. The existence of places like Sublime tells us something important about the Eye of Terror. Even in the most hostile environment imaginable, even in a place where reality itself is unreliable and the very air can kill you, sentient beings find ways to organize, to trade, to build something approaching a civilization. This resilience is both admirable and deeply disturbing. Yes, because it means that the eye is not merely a wasteland. It is a living, functioning ecosystem of madness, a self-sustaining economy of suffering that has been operating for 10,000 years and shows no signs of slowing down. The Dark Mechanicum represents another fascinating facet of civilization within the eye. These are the tech priests who turned their backs on the machine god of Mars and embraced chaos during the Horus Heresy, and within the eye, they have continued to practice their dark arts for 10 millennia. The Forge world of Zana II is said to be a great stronghold of the Dark Mechanicum, a world wholly given over to demon machines and infernal industries, where mills grind flesh and suffering to make the insane visions of its nightmarish masters real. Countless millions are enslaved to work in a world-spanning network of labyrinthine forges, churning out an endless supply of weapons and armaments for the traitor legion's long war against the Imperium. Another Dark Mechanicum world, known as Gallium, is covered with smelteries and forges operated by robotic slaves with clockwork bodies. And here is the truly disturbing detail about Gallium. None of its infrastructure was built in the conventional sense. The forges, the factories, the robotic workers, all of it was manifested by the warp, brought into existence by the collective thoughts and desires of the Dark Mechanicum priests who inhabit the world. The warp took their obsession with machinery and industry and made it real, creating a planet-spanning factory complex that operates according to rules that are part engineering and part sorcery, a hybrid of technology and madness that defies categorization. The traitor legions themselves represent yet another layer of complexity within the eye. Yes, these are the space marines who followed Horus into damnation during the heresy, and their 10,000 years within the Eye have transformed them into something quite different from the warriors they once were. Time within the Eye does not flow as it does in the material universe, and this temporal distortion has had bizarre and unpredictable effects on the traitor marines. Some have experienced the full weight of 10 millennia, their bodies and minds bearing the scars of countless centuries of warfare in the most hostile environment imaginable. Others have experienced far less subjective time, emerging from the Eye to discover that centuries or even millennia have passed, while they felt only years or decades go by. Some have been caught in temporal loops, reliving the same battles over and over in an eternal cycle of violence that never resolves. And a very few, have been thrown backward in time by the Eye's temporal anomalies, arriving in the material universe before events that they remember having already occurred. This temporal instability is one of the things that makes the Eye so dangerous, not just for those within it, but for the galaxy at large. When the traitor legions launch a black crusade, when they pour forth from the Eye's boundaries to assault the worlds of the Imperium, they bring with them warriors whose experience of time is fundamentally different from that of their opponents. A Chaos Lord who has subjectively experienced only a few decades of warfare since the heresy might be fighting alongside a sorcerer who has lived through the full 10,000 years, and both might be accompanying a demon prince who experiences all of time simultaneously. As this mix of temporal perspectives gives the forces of chaos a kind of strategic depth that their opponents often struggle to comprehend. And within the Eye itself, this temporal instability means that the history of the place is not a single, coherent narrative, but rather a chaotic tangle of overlapping timelines, alternate possibilities, and events that may or may not have happened, depending on which temporal current you happen to be caught in. The wars between the traitor legions that occurred in the aftermath of the heresy, the brutal legion wars that tore the 9 traitor legions apart and reduced them from mighty armies to squabbling warbands, happened at different times for different participants. Events that one warband remembers as recent history might be ancient legend for another, and battles that are just beginning for some have already ended for others. The Iron Warriors, for example, are retreated to their fortress world of Medrengard within the Eye, where the Primarch Perturabo broods in eternal frustration, apparently still angry about his long-standing rivalry with Rogal Dorn. Medrengard is essentially one vast city in constant industrial motion, a world of fortifications and siege works that reflects the Iron Warriors' obsessive dedication to the arts of war. The Thousand Sons, those tragically cursed sorcerers of Magnus the Red, took their planet of Sortiarius, the planet of the sorcerers, deep within the Eye, where they pursued their endless quest for forbidden knowledge amid spires of crystallized warp energy and libraries of books that write themselves. Each of the traitor legions carved out their own domains within the Eye, creating pocket empires that reflected their particular obsessions and pathologies. But it was the Black Legion, forged from the remnants of the Sons of Horus and warriors from every other traitor legion under the leadership of Abaddon the Despoiler, that eventually emerged as the dominant force within the Eye. The story of the Black Legion's rise is one of the most compelling narratives in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore, and it is intimately connected to the nature of the Eye of Terror and the things that dwell within it. Abaddon understood something that the other traitor lords did not. He understood that the Eye was not merely a refuge, but a trap, a prison that would slowly destroy anyone who remained within it without purpose. He understood that the great game, the eternal conflict between the Chaos Gods, would consume the traitor legions just as surely as it consumed everything else within the Eye if they did not find a way to direct their energies outward toward the Imperium that had cast them out. And so Abaddon launched his Black Crusades, 13 great campaigns over the course of 10,000 years, each one a massive assault on the Imperium launched from within the Eye. These crusades were not the random acts of violence that many imperial historians believe them to be. Each one had a specific strategic objective, and together they formed a long-term plan aimed at breaking the Cadian Gate and allowing the Eye of Terror to expand into the broader galaxy. The 13th Black Crusade, the one that finally succeeded in destroying Cadia and creating the Great Rift, was the culmination of 10 millennia of patient, methodical preparation. But even Abaddon, the War Master of Chaos, the most powerful mortal servant of the ruinous powers, is not immune to the dangers of the Eye. The things that frighten the Chaos Gods also present threats to their greatest champions. Abaddon has survived the Eye's hazards through a combination of raw power, political cunning, and a willingness to deal with any entity, mortal or demonic, that can advance his goals. But even he avoids the Bissos. Even he gives the Fire Tide a wide berth. Even he treats the Crone Worlds with caution. Because Abaddon knows, perhaps better than anyone else in the galaxy, that the Eye of Terror is not a place that can be truly conquered or controlled. It can only be survived. The Dark Mechanicum's innovations are among the things that the Chaos Gods view with a mixture of interest and wariness. These tech priests have spent 10,000 years experimenting with the fusion of technology and warp energy, creating weapons and devices that blur the line between the mechanical and the demonic. Demon engines, those terrible war machines that house bound demons within mechanical shells, are perhaps the most famous products of their forges, but they are far from the only ones. The Dark Mechanicum has developed technologies that even the Chaos Gods do not fully understand. Hybrid creations that draw upon both the physical laws of the material universe and the psychic laws of the warp in ways that no other faction has achieved. And this brings us to a broader point about the Eye of Terror and the things that frighten the Chaos Gods. Now, one of the reasons the Chaos Gods are uncomfortable with the existence of entities and phenomena within the Eye that they cannot control is that such things represent a fundamental challenge to their understanding of the universe. The Chaos Gods believe, and want others to believe, that the warp is their domain, that they are the supreme rulers of the Imperium, and that everything within it ultimately serves their purposes. The existence of the Fire Tide, the Bissos, the ancient Eldari technology, and the countless other anomalies within the Eye puts the lie to that belief. The warp is not the property of the Chaos Gods. It is a vast, ancient, and fundamentally chaotic dimension that existed long before they did, and that contains multitudes of forces and entities that they have never been able to bring under their control. Now let us turn our attention to another category of things within the Eye of Terror that the Chaos Gods have reason to fear, though for very different reasons than the Fire Tide. We need to talk about the Crone Worlds. Before the fall of the Eldari, before the birth of Slaanesh, before the Eye of Terror even existed in its current form, the region of space that would become the Eye was the heart of the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known. The core worlds of the Eldari Empire, those impossibly beautiful planets that represented the pinnacle of 1,000,000 years of cultural and technological development, and occupied the very center of what is now the most dangerous place in the galaxy. When the Eye opened, when Slaanesh's birth cry tore reality apart and swallowed the heart of the Eldari Empire into the warp, those worlds were not destroyed. They were transformed. The Eldari now call these worlds the Crone Worlds, named after Moriheg, the Crone goddess, who was their deity of fate and destiny. It is a fitting name, as for these worlds represent the fate that the Eldari brought upon themselves through their own hubris and depravity. Once, they were paradises beyond imagining, worlds of crystal spires and singing forests, of cities that floated on clouds of solidified light, and gardens where flowers bloomed in colors that existed nowhere else in the universe. Now, they are hellish parodies of their former grandeur, maddening realms of tortured and unnatural landscapes that exist in a nightmarish twilight between real space and the warp. Control over the Crone Worlds is sought by rival demon lords for the entertainment of their infernal masters. The 4 Chaos Gods view these ancient Eldari planets as particularly valuable prizes, not for their physical resources, which have long since been corrupted beyond any practical use, but for their psychic significance. And these were the worlds where the Aeldari's descent into depravity was most concentrated, the places where the emotions and desires that gave birth to Slaanesh burned most intensely. As a result, the Crone worlds are saturated with psychic energy of extraordinary potency, and the demons and demon princes who control them can draw upon that energy to enhance their own power. But the Crone worlds are not merely sources of power, but they are also repositories of knowledge and technology so advanced that even the Chaos gods treat them with a kind of wary respect. The Aeldari, at the height of their empire, had achieved a level of technological mastery that exceeded anything currently available to any faction in the galaxy. Their understanding of the warp, of psychic energy, of the fundamental nature of reality itself, was so profound that it allowed them to create artifacts and devices that even the most advanced civilizations of the present day cannot replicate or fully understand. Many of these artifacts still exist on the Crone worlds, buried beneath the rubble of fallen cities or hidden within the corrupted remains of once grand repositories of knowledge. Spirit stones, those precious psycho-crystalline gems that allow Aeldari souls to escape the clutches of Slaanesh after death. It can only be found on the Crone worlds. They crystallize naturally from the psychic energies of the eye, forming like mineral deposits in caves, and they are so vital to the survival of the remaining Aeldari that craft worlds regularly send expeditions into the eye to harvest them, despite the almost suicidal danger of such missions. But spirit stones are far from the only treasures hidden on the Crone worlds. There are weapons of incomprehensible power, devices that could reshape reality itself, or stores of knowledge that contain secrets the Chaos gods themselves might prefer to remain buried. The 5 Crone-zords of Morai Heg, legendary relics of the Aeldari Crone goddess, are scattered across the Crone worlds, and their potential power is so great that even the goddess Yvraine, herald of the Aeldari god of the dead, has risked traveling into the Eye to retrieve them. And here is where things become truly interesting from the perspective of the Chaos gods. What the technology of the pre-fall Aeldari was not merely powerful, it was fundamentally different from anything that Chaos can produce. It was built upon principles that the Chaos gods do not fully understand, utilizing energies and materials that do not respond to the normal rules of the warp. The Aeldari's webway, that vast network of tunnels through a dimension that exists between the warp and real space, still functions within the Eye of Terror, and its portals and passages are defended by forces that the servants of Chaos cannot easily overcome. The technology that the Aeldari use to traverse the webway, to shape spirit stones, to create weapons capable of killing gods, that technology is still there on the Crone worlds, waiting to be found and used. And it is not only the Aeldari's technology that the Chaos gods need to worry about. There are hints in the lore that the Crone worlds harbor something far more dangerous than ancient artifacts. The Aeldari who did not escape the fall, those who were trapped within the Eye when Slaanesh was born, did not all die. Some survived, transformed by the energies of Chaos into something new and terrible. These Chaos Eldar, as they are sometimes called, are among the most wretched, evil, and terrifying creatures ever to exist, are tainted by the sorcerous energies of Chaos, but retaining the innate psychic power and ancient knowledge of their race. They are beings that even the 4 gods view with a mixture of contempt and caution, for they are unpredictable, powerful, and motivated by desires that do not align neatly with the goals of any single Chaos deity. Slaanesh, in particular, has a complicated relationship with the surviving Aeldari of the Crone worlds. Menas, the youngest Chaos god, was born from the collective psyche of the Aeldari, and there is a deep and fundamental connection between Slaanesh and the Aeldari that goes beyond simple creator and creation. Some lore suggests that the Aeldari have the potential to unmake Slaanesh, to reverse the process of the god's birth and reclaim the psychic energy that was stolen from their race. This possibility, however remote, represents an existential threat to the youngest of the 4, and it is one that keeps Slaanesh keenly interested in everything that happens on the Crone worlds. The Crone worlds, then, represent a kind of ticking time bomb within the Eye of Terror. They contain the remnants of a civilization that was powerful enough to accidentally create a god, and the knowledge and technology buried within their corrupted ruins could potentially be used to destroy one. For the Chaos Gods, the Crone Worlds are simultaneously valuable assets and potential threats, as sources of power that could also become sources of their own undoing. No wonder the Demon Lords fight so viciously over control of them. Craftworld Ibrasil has spent thousands of years sailing near the Eye, launching expeditions to the Crone Worlds to recover waystones and other artifacts, and the frequency of these missions has increased dramatically since the opening of the Great Rift. Many within the Aeldari believe that this is not merely about securing spirit stones, but they believe that the seers of Ibrasil are searching for something specific, something that could turn the tide against Slaanesh once and for all. And then there is Craftworld Altansar, the most enigmatic of all the Aeldari craftworlds. When the Eye of Terror first tore open reality, Altansar was caught in its pull, unable to escape the cataclysm of the fall. It was gradually dragged into the Eye, where it spent millennia lost within the most dangerous region of space in the galaxy. At the Phoenix Lord Morgan Ra eventually found the remnants of his craftworld and guided them out of the Eye. But the other Aeldari craftworlds regard Altanzar with open suspicion and hostility. The idea that any group of Aeldari could have survived millennia within the Eye of Terror without being corrupted is almost impossible to believe. And what secrets Altanzar might have brought back with them from their long imprisonment is a question that keeps the seers of other craftworlds awake at night. And now, the Crone Worlds exist alongside the many Demon Worlds that form the bulk of the Eye's planetary population. The Demon Worlds are where the true extent of the Great Game becomes visible, and understanding the Great Game is essential to understanding what frightens the Chaos Gods within the Eye. Because the greatest threat to a Chaos God is not the Emperor or the Necrons, or even the Tyranids. The greatest threat to any single Chaos God is the other three. But the Great Game is the eternal struggle for dominance between the four Chaos Gods. It is their primary concern, their all-consuming obsession, the reason for their existence. The warp is not merely their home, it is their battlefield, the arena for an endless competition that has been playing out since before humanity first stood upright on the plains of ancient terror. No Chaos God can ever truly win the Great Game, for if the other ruinous powers were obliterated, the warp would return to its primordial state of placid serenity, and chaos as a primal force would cease to exist. The game is self-perpetuating, self-sustaining, and eternal. Each Chaos God is locked in a specific rivalry with one of the others. Khorne despises Slaanesh, viewing the Prince of Pleasure's emphasis on sensation and excess as the opposite of his own doctrine of martial honor and indiscriminate slaughter. Tzeentch schemes endlessly against Nurgle, whose embrace of stagnation and despair is the antithesis of Tzeentch's desire for change and ambition. These rivalries drive an endless cycle of warfare within the warp, as the armies of one god constantly invade the territories of another, seeking to expand their master's domain and diminish the power of their rivals. Within the Eye of Terror, this game of cosmic proportions plays out on a planetary scale. Demon worlds change hands regularly as the fortunes of the Great Game shift. A world that was firmly under the control of Nurgle yesterday might be swept by the armies of Tzeentch today and claimed by the forces of Khorne tomorrow. The inhabitants of these worlds, both mortal and demonic, are swept up in the constant tides of conflict, their lives and deaths serving as nothing more than counters in a game played by beings who view individual existence as utterly meaningless. Take the demon world of Crucible, a planet that changes its fundamental nature depending on which of the dark gods holds dominance over it at any given time. When Khorne is ascendant, Crucible becomes a realm of crude violence and savage anger, where the souls of mortals who died in battle are tormented for eternity. When Slaanesh takes control, the violence continues, but is enacted tenderly, as a gift between lovers, a horrifying fusion of pleasure and pain that defies mortal comprehension. Under Nurgle, the trapped souls experience an eternity of decay and rebirth. dying and being reborn in an endless cycle of decomposition and regeneration. And when Siench holds sway, the pain becomes one of sanity torn asunder, as the self is lost amid seas of madness, and the very concept of individual identity dissolves into a kaleidoscope of shifting possibilities. But Crucible is merely one world among thousands, each with its own particular flavor of nightmare. Consider Drakasi, or a demon world wholly dedicated to Khorne. Its most notable feature is a sea of blood that covers the entire globe, connecting the various cities of the planet. Each city has its own arena where gladiatorial games are held in honor of the blood god, and the ruling class of the world, which includes demons, barbarian chieftains, chaos marines, and ordinary mortals who have risen to power through sheer violence. Spends most of its time either watching these games or launching raids to other worlds for new slaves to fight in them. Lord Abondrake, a reptilian demon prince, runs the games and commands the greatest army on the planet, and his Ophidian guard, clad in black armor and armed with power swords, enforce his will with a combination of discipline and savagery that even other servants of Khorne find impressive. Then there is Temporia, a world dedicated to Tzeentch that is a mind-boggling contradiction of geography and artifice. It is home to cog plateaus, whatever those might be, helical factories that seem to serve no discernible purpose, rainstorms of magma that fall upward rather than down, and spiraling stairways that form around newcomers as they arrive, leading them on impossible paths through a landscape that changes faster than the mind can process. The world is infested with demon engines and flamers, are the lesser demons of Tzeentch, and it serves as the workshop of a warpsmith named Valadrak, who uses the world's ever-shifting nature as raw material for his creations. The world of immortal sorrows bears a name that tells you everything you need to know about the kind of place it is. Once at the heart of the ancient Eldari civilization, it is now a crone world ruled by a demon of Slaanesh called Elisar Sirath. Under a canopy of great golden forest, our rivers flow that are made from the tears of Eldari children, and the demons of the Dark Prince torment the trapped souls of fallen Eldari in ways that are too horrible to describe. It is perhaps the worst place in the entire Eye to be an Eldari, and the worst place to be a human is not much better. Each of these worlds is a self-contained universe of suffering, a pocket reality shaped by the will of whichever chaos god or demon prince has claimed it. And each one is, in its own way, on a battlefield in the great game, a territory to be defended or conquered, a prize to be won or lost in the eternal struggle between the four dark gods. The sheer scale of this conflict, the number of worlds involved, the number of beings caught up in it, the amount of suffering it generates, is almost beyond mortal comprehension. And this is what frightens the Chaos Gods, perhaps more than anything else. Not any single external threat, but each other. Yet the great game ensures that none of them can ever truly rest, can ever truly consolidate their power, can ever truly feel secure in their position. For all their seeming omnipotence, the Chaos Gods are trapped in an eternal stalemate, a prison of their own making from which they can never escape. They are as much prisoners of the Eye of Terror as the mortal slaves who toil on its demon worlds, bound by the rules of a game that they can never win and can never stop playing. There is a special irony in this situation that is worth contemplating. The Chaos Gods are beings born from the emotions of mortal creatures, shaped by the collective psychic output of billions of sentient minds. They are, in a very real sense, the products of the very beings they claim to rule. And the great game, the eternal conflict that consumes the vast majority of their attention and energy, is itself a reflection of the emotional conflicts that rage within mortal hearts. The struggle between rage and despair, between ambition and apathy, between excess and restraint, between the desire for change and the longing for stability. These are human struggles, mortal struggles, and the great game is merely their amplification to cosmic proportions. The Chaos Gods are, in the end, prisoners of the emotions that created them. unable to transcend the fundamental drives that give them form and purpose, eternally locked in conflicts that mirror the petty squabbles of the mortal beings they so thoroughly despise. After the fall of Cadia and the opening of the Great Rift, this dynamic intensified dramatically. Chaos was ascendant across the galaxy, and the armies of the ruinous powers devastated world after world. But almost immediately, the great game reasserted itself. Nurgle's servants claimed the Scourge Stars, and jealous Tzeentch saw an opportunity, ever subtle. The Changer of Ways informed Horn of their brother's new empire, and the Blood God struck without hesitation. Tzeentch's forces quickly joined the conflict, forcing Nurgle to pull servants away from other theatres of war. The delicious slaughter attracted Slaanesh, and soon the Scourge Stars were home to a full-scale battle between demons of all four gods, turning entire planets into demon worlds. This pattern, this endless cycle of alliance and betrayal, expansion and retreat, of victory and defeat, is the true nature of the great game, and it plays out most visibly and most violently within the Eye of Terror. There is yet another threat to the Chaos Gods that we should discuss before we move on, one that comes not from within the Eye but from beyond the galaxy itself. The Tyranids, those extragalactic devourers that consume all biomass in their path, represent a unique kind of threat to the ruinous powers. Unlike every other major faction in the galaxy, the Tyranids are not susceptible to the influence of chaos. Their hive mind, that vast collective consciousness that guides the actions of trillions of individual organisms, generates what is known as the shadow in the warp, a psychic dead zone that smothers the influence of the Imperium wherever the Tyranid fleets go. Within the shadow, demons cannot manifest, psychic powers fail or become erratic. The voices of the Chaos Gods are silenced. For the Chaos Gods, who derive their power from the psychic energy of sentient beings, the Tyranids represent a kind of ultimate nightmare. The Tyranids do not pray, they do not hope, they do not fear or rage or despair. They simply consume, and in consuming, they eliminate the mortal populations whose emotions feed the Chaos Gods. Every world that the Tyranids devour is a world that will never again generate the psychic energy that the ruinous powers depend upon for their existence. While if the Tyranids were to succeed in their apparent goal of consuming all biomass in the galaxy, the result would be the gradual starvation of the Chaos Gods themselves. The warp would grow calm, the demonic legions would weaken and fade, and the ruinous powers would diminish until they were nothing more than faint echoes in an ocean of psychic silence. The Tyranids have already shown that they can affect the warp in significant ways, but their shadow in the warp has disrupted warp travel across entire sectors, cut off worlds from the Astronomicon, and even interfered with the manifestation of demons on worlds under assault. And the Tyranid hive fleets that have reached the galaxy so far may represent only a fraction of the total biomass that is making its way toward the Milky Way, from whatever distant galaxy or galaxies they originated in. The true scale of the Tyranid threat is unknown, and that uncertainty is itself a source of fear for the Chaos Gods. It is worth noting that the Tyranids were attracted to the galaxy in part by the Astronomicon itself, that same psychic beacon whose collision with the Eye of Terror creates the fire tide. The Emperor's great lighthouse, which serves as humanity's guide through the warp, also served as a dinner bell for the most voracious predators in the universe. This is another of those uncomfortable ironies that characterize the Warhammer 40,000 setting. The Emperor's greatest creation, the device that holds the Imperium together and wages passive war against the Chaos Gods, is also the thing that may ultimately doom the galaxy by attracting an enemy that no faction, not even Chaos, can fully comprehend or combat. Now, we have discussed the things within the Eye that frighten the Chaos Gods, the Bissos at its center, the fire tide born of the Astronomicon's light, the ancient secrets of the Crone worlds, and the eternal threat of the Great Game. But there is one more category of threat that we need to discuss, one that comes not from within the Eye itself, but from the technology of a civilization far older than chaos, far older than the Aeldari, and far older than humanity. We need to talk about the Necrons and their pylons. The Necrons are the oldest intelligent species still active in the galaxy, and ancient beyond the comprehension of mortal minds. They fought the war in heaven against the Old Ones millions of years before the Aeldari Empire even existed, and during that war, they developed technology specifically designed to counter the psychic powers that the Old Ones and their creations wielded against them. The Necrons have no connection to the warp. Their bodies are made of living metal. Their minds are patterns of energy stored in mechanical substrates. And they cast no shadow in the Imperium. They are, in the most literal sense, invisible to the warp and immune to its influence. And they use this advantage to create weapons against the warp that the Chaos Gods have never been able to overcome. The most significant of these weapons were the pylons, massive devices constructed from a substance known as blackstone or noctilith that have the ability to suppress the activity of the warp in their immediate vicinity. The Cadian pylons, one of the most famous examples, were enormous structures standing about 500 meters above the surface and extending 250 meters below, with potentially thousands more concealed underground. They were placed across the surface of Cadia and other worlds near the Eye of Terror over 60 million years ago, and for all of that time, they served as a containment system for the warp energies that would eventually become the Eye. Think about the implications of that. The Necrons built a technology 60 million years ago that is capable of suppressing the power of the Chaos Gods. A technology that the Chaos Gods themselves, despite having had 60 million years to study and attempt to counteract it, have never been able to overcome. The pylons on Cadia were so effective that they created the Cadian Gate, a region of stable warp space near the Eye of Terror that allowed safe passage for Imperial ships, as simply through the passive emanation of their anti-psychic field. And when Belisarius Cawl, with the help of the Necron overlord Trazyn the Infinite, finally figured out how to activate the full power of the Cadian pylon network, the result was extraordinary. The Eye of Terror began to close. Let that sink in. A technology built by mortal hands 60 million years ago had the power to seal shut the greatest warp rift in the galaxy. The Chaos Gods, with all their power over the Imperium, it could not prevent it. If Abaddon the Despoiler had not acted when he did, hurling the damaged bulk of the Blackstone Fortress, Will of Eternity, at the surface of Cadia in a desperate kinetic strike that destroyed the planet and its pylon network, the Eye of Terror might have been sealed forever. The Chaos Gods' greatest stronghold in the material universe, the place from which they have launched 10,000 years of crusades against the Imperium, but could have been eliminated in a matter of hours by technology that predates their own existence as conscious entities. The destruction of Cadia was, from the perspective of the Chaos Gods, a catastrophically narrow escape, and the aftermath was not entirely in their favor. While the destruction of the pylons allowed the warp to expand, creating the great rift that now splits the galaxy in two, and it also destroyed the carefully maintained balance that had kept the Eye of Terror contained for millennia. The Great Rift is far less controllable than the Eye ever was, and its creation has had consequences that the Chaos Gods did not anticipate and may not be able to manage. But the pylons are not gone. They existed on many worlds across the galaxy, not just Cadia, and the Necrons are waking up. The Silent King, Sarek, ruler of the Necron dynasties, has returned to the galaxy and begun rebuilding the pylon networks. The most ambitious of these projects is the Pariah Nexus, a massive network of pylons in the Nephilim sector that is creating a region of space completely cut off from the warp. Within the Pariah Nexus, psychic powers do not function. Demons cannot manifest. The warp itself is pushed back, creating a zone of absolute material reality where the Chaos Gods have no influence whatsoever. For the Chaos Gods, as the Necrons represent an existential threat of the highest order, not because they are powerful warriors, though they are, and not because they possess advanced technology, though they do. The Necrons are dangerous because they possess the ability to shut the warp out of the material universe entirely. If the Necron dynasties were to fully awaken and bring their pylon networks to full power, they could potentially seal every warp rift in the galaxy. They'd cut off every demon world from the Imperium and starve the chaos gods of the psychic energy that sustains their existence. The Necrons could, in theory, end chaos, not defeat it in battle, not push it back temporarily, not contain it behind barriers of Blackstone and willpower. End it, permanently, by simply closing the door between the warp and the material universe and refusing to let it open again. And the Chaos Gods know this. They have known it for 60 million years. Ever since the first pylons were erected during the war in heaven. The fact that they have never been able to develop a counter to pylon technology, despite having had an almost incomprehensible amount of time to do so, is perhaps the most damning evidence of their limitations. The Chaos Gods, for all their power within the warp, are fundamentally dependent on the connection between the Immaterium and the material universe. Without that connection, and sever that connection, and the Chaos Gods would weaken and eventually fade away. The Necrons threaten to sever that connection, and the Chaos Gods have no answer to the threat. This is why the fall of Cardia was both a victory and a defeat for Chaos. Yes, the destruction of the pylons allowed the warp to expand. Yes, the Great Rift has given the forces of Chaos unprecedented access to the material universe. Our work. It proved that the technology to work. It proved that the technology to seal the Eye of Terror exists and can be activated. And it showed that the Necrons who created that technology and understand it better than anyone else in the galaxy are waking up and rebuilding their networks. The Blackstone itself, that mysterious substance from which the pylons are constructed, has become one of the most sought-after resources in the galaxy. Both the Imperium and the Necrons are scrambling to acquire it, with the Adeptus Mechanicus desperately trying to understand how to use it, and the Necron Cryptex quietly reclaiming the stockpiles that have been dormant for 60 million years. If either faction succeeds in building a new pylon network along the length of the Great Rift, they could potentially stitch that wound closed, healing the galaxy of the catastrophic damage that the fall of Cadia caused. For the Chaos Gods, who have spent 10 millennia working toward the moment when they could break free from the Eye of Terror and claim the galaxy, the prospect of being sealed back behind Blackstone walls must be the ultimate nightmare. All of their plans, all of their crusades, all of the millions of lives they have corrupted and consumed in pursuit of their goal of total domination, but could be rendered meaningless by the activation of a technology that was ancient before any of them were born. There are other things within the Eye that deserve mention, horrors that do not fit neatly into any of the categories we have discussed so far. There are the space hulks, those massive conglomerations of wrecked ships that drift through the warp like metallic tumors, occasionally washing ashore in the dead zones of the Eye where certain currents of the warp end. As these space hulks carry within them the accumulated horrors of centuries or even millennia of warp exposure, from mutated crews to Xenos infestations to entities that seem to exist partially outside normal reality. Boarding a space hulk within the Eye of Terror is considered one of the most dangerous operations that any military force can undertake, and the things encountered within their twisted corridors often defy description. Mapped with weapons forged from concepts rather than the raw materials of the universe, with weapons forged from concepts rather than metal. There are the remnants of original crews who have somehow retained their sanity despite centuries of warp exposure, begging for rescue or death with equal desperation. There are things that seem to be made of liquid metal and malevolent intention, whose very touch corrupts and transforms whatever it contacts. These are the nightmares that the Eye breeds in its darker corners, the products of millions of years of psychic contamination acting upon matter and energy in ways that no science can explain and no mind can fully comprehend. And then there are the entities that seem to belong to no one, that serve no god and follow no agenda that mortal minds can discern. Within the deepest reaches of the Eye, and beyond the demon worlds, and the crone worlds, and the burned-out husks of the fire-tide zones, there are things that even the most powerful sorcerers refuse to name. They are glimpsed only in the peripheral vision, felt only as a cold weight pressing against the edges of consciousness, heard only as a distant whisper that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. They are not demons. They are not psychic projections. They are something else. Is something that may have existed in the warp before the Chaos Gods awoke. Something that may represent the original inhabitants of the Imperium, the beings that dwelt in the psychic ocean before mortal emotions stirred it into the maelstrom of chaos. The lore is deliberately unclear about the nature of these entities, and that ambiguity is part of what makes them so frightening. In a universe where the Chaos Gods are known quantities, where their motivations and methods are understood, and however imperfectly, the existence of unknown entities in the warp represents a fundamental threat to the established order of things. The Chaos Gods like to present themselves as the ultimate powers of the Imperium, the supreme rulers of the psychic dimension that underlies all of reality. But the suggestion that there are things in the warp older than they are, things that do not acknowledge their authority and cannot be controlled by their power, undermines that claim in a way that the gods find deeply unsettling. Consider the implications from the perspective of Tzeentch, the architect of fate, whose entire existence is predicated on the idea that he is the master of all knowledge and all schemes. The existence of entities or phenomena within the warp that he cannot perceive, cannot predict, and cannot incorporate into his plans would be anathema to everything he represents. Or consider Khorne, the blood god, who claims dominion over all violence and all warfare. The existence of forces within the eye that can destroy his demons without engaging in anything resembling combat, forces that simply erase existence rather than conquering it in battle, would be a direct challenge to his authority. Nurgle, who embraces all forms of decay and entropy, would be disturbed by forces that do not decay but simply cease to exist, vanishing without leaving even the residue of destruction that Nurgle feeds upon. And Slaanesh, who craves all sensation and all experience, would find the existence of states of being that produce no sensation at all, that exist in a void beyond even the absence of feeling, to be fundamentally incomprehensible and therefore terrifying. The Eye of Terror, then, is not merely a stronghold for the forces of chaos. It is a prison, a battleground, and a mystery all at once. It contains things that the Chaos Gods control, things that they fear, and things that they cannot even comprehend. It is the birthplace of a god and the graveyard of a civilization. It is the gateway through which the forces of chaos assault the material universe, and the barrier that prevents them from overwhelming it entirely. It is the place where the Emperor's power manifests most aggressively, and the place where the Necron's ancient technology still holds sway. It is the home of the traitor legions and the tomb of the Eldari Empire. And at its center, in the depths of the Bissos, there is something that even the gods themselves dare not approach. Let us take a moment to consider what all of this means for the broader narrative of Warhammer 40,000. The Eye of Terror and its contents represent a fundamental truth about the Chaos Gods that is easy to overlook amid all the stories of their seemingly infinite power. The Chaos Gods are not omnipotent. They are not invincible. They are not even, in the strictest sense, gods. They are enormously powerful psychic entities, created and sustained by the emotions of mortal beings, but they are limited in ways that are often obscured by the sheer scale of their power and influence. The Bissos reminds us that the raw fabric of the warp, the primordial substance from which the Chaos Gods themselves emerged, is not theirs to control. It existed before them, it sustains them, and it may one day consume them. The Firetide demonstrates that the Emperor of mankind, even in his diminished state, can project power into the very heart of the Chaos Gods' domain and wage war against them in their own territory. The Crone Worlds represent the danger that ancient knowledge and technology from a civilization that the Chaos Gods did not create and could not fully corrupt, poses to the established order of the warp. The Great Game reveals that the Chaos Gods are their own worst enemies, are locked in an eternal conflict that prevents any one of them from ever truly dominating the others. And the Necron pylons show that a technology exists which could, in theory, end the influence of chaos over the material universe entirely. Each of these threats, each of these limitations, is a crack in the facade of divine omnipotence that the Chaos Gods present to the galaxy, and together they paint a picture of beings who are far more vulnerable than they would like anyone, as including their own followers, to believe. The Eye of Terror, for all its horror, for all the suffering it contains and the destruction it has caused, is also a place of hope in its own dark and twisted way. Because if the Chaos Gods can be frightened, if there are forces within their own domain that they cannot control, then perhaps they can be defeated. Perhaps the eternal war against chaos is not as hopeless as it sometimes seems. Perhaps the things that live within the Eye of Terror, as the things that scare even the dark gods of the warp, are proof that the galaxy is not as doomed as the forces of chaos would have us believe. In the wake of Cadia's fall, the galaxy has changed. The Great Rift has split the Imperium in two, creating the Dark Imperium where the light of the Astronomicon cannot reach. The Chaos Gods are more powerful than they have been in millennia, as their forces rampaging across the galaxy with an impunity that they have not enjoyed since the days of the Horus Heresy. And yet, even now, even at the moment of their greatest triumph, the Chaos Gods are not secure. The Necrons are waking up, rebuilding their pylon networks, creating zones of space where the warp has no influence. The Emperor's power continues to manifest within the Eye, burning away corruption and waging war against the demons in their own territory. The secrets of the Crone Worlds remain buried beneath the ruins of the Eldari Empire, waiting for someone brave or desperate enough to unearth them. And at the center of the Eye, in the unfathomable depths of the Bissos, something ancient and terrible and completely beyond the control of any being in the galaxy continues to exist, a reminder that there are forces in the universe that even the gods cannot tame. The Eye of Terror is many things. It is a wound in the galaxy that will never heal. It is a prison for the traitor legions and a breeding ground for the forces of chaos. It is a graveyard for the Eldari Empire and a repository for the most dangerous knowledge in the galaxy. It is the birthplace of a god and the battlefield where the Emperor wages an eternal war from his golden throne on distant Terra. And it is, above all else, a place of secrets, a place where the truth about the nature of chaos, the warp, and the universe itself is hidden behind layers of madness and horror that most minds cannot penetrate. But perhaps the most important secret of all is the simplest one. The Chaos Gods are afraid. Not of any single threat, not of any specific enemy, but of the fundamental truth that their power has limits, that their domain is not as secure as they pretend, and that the galaxy is full of things that they cannot control. The Eye of Terror, their greatest stronghold, it is also the place where those limits are most visible, where their vulnerabilities are most exposed, where the cracks in their facade are widest and most impossible to hide. And that, in the end, is what makes the Eye of Terror the most fascinating and the most terrifying place in the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. Not because of what the Chaos Gods have built there, but because of what they cannot destroy. Not because of the power they wield within its borders, but because of the power that operates there beyond their control. Not because of the demons and traitor marines and corrupted worlds that fill its interior, but because of the things that exist alongside them, the fire angels and the ancient artifacts, and the nameless horrors and the 60-million-year-old technology that together represent the simple, devastating truth that the Chaos Gods are not, and never have been, the masters of all they survey. The Eye stares into the galaxy, and the galaxy stares back, and somewhere in the depths of that mutual gaze, something is watching that is older than the gods, stranger than the warp, and more dangerous than anything that mortal minds have yet imagined. It has been there since before the Eldari built their empire, since before the Necrons went to sleep, since before the first Chaos God stirred to life in the primordial psychic ocean. Yeah, and it will be there long after the last star has burned out, and the last mortal soul has faded into silence. The Eye of Terror does not merely contain the things that scare the Chaos Gods. In a very real sense, the Eye of Terror is the thing that scares them, because the Eye is a reminder that chaos, for all its seemingly boundless power, is not the fundamental force of the universe. It is an aberration, a distortion. It's a corruption of something that existed before it and will exist after it is gone. The warp existed before the Chaos Gods, and it will exist after them. The Eye of Terror existed before Slaanesh was born, as a sealed wound from the war in heaven, and it will continue to exist regardless of which gods happen to be ascendant at any given moment. The Chaos Gods did not create the Eye. They simply moved in after the door was blown open. They are squatters in a ruin that they have decorated with their particular brands of madness but do not own and cannot fully control. And that realization, that dawning understanding that they are not the ultimate power in their own home, that there are things beneath the floorboards and behind the walls that they cannot see and cannot stop, is what truly frightens the Lords of the Warp. It is the fear of irrelevance, the fear of obsolescence, the fear that, in the grand scheme of the universe, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But even war has its mysteries, its unknowns, its dark corners where things lurk that no one, not even the gods of war themselves, fully understands. The Eye of Terror is the darkest of those corners, and the things that live within it are the galaxy's greatest and most terrible secrets. So the next time you look up at the stars and wonder about the nature of the universe, remember this. Somewhere out there, in a wound in reality that stretches across 20,000 light-years of the galaxy, there are things that make even the gods afraid. And whatever those things are, they are patient. They have been waiting for a very, very long time, and they are still waiting. Thank you so much for listening all the way through to the end of this deep dive into the Eye of Terror and the things within it that frighten even the Chaos Gods. This is one of those topics that truly shows the incredible depth and complexity of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and I hope this exploration has given you a deeper appreciation for just how strange, terrifying, and fascinating the Eye truly is. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and subscribe to Q on 40,000 for more atmospheric explorations of the darkest corners of the 41st millennium. We have so many more stories to tell, so many more secrets to uncover, and so many more journeys to take together into the grim darkness of the far future. Drop a comment and let me know what you think lives at the center of the Eye. Is it something connected to the old ones, a remnant of the war in heaven, and or something even stranger that none of us have imagined yet? I would love to hear your theories. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the Emperor protects, even in the deepest darkness. Take care.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.